You realize we can't hear a word you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything. Sorry. We had several computer problems. The YouTube was delayed and it was creating a feedback loop. Of audio.
Okay.
So I think that's why I muted it, and I think we finally got it sorted out. So after that mild moment of panic, I apologize for that. We are starting off with Article 6 and 7 and then getting into Module 2B. Many of you guys are pretty familiar with the process by now. Many of you have submitted comments. We'll go ahead and start going through those comments one by one. We'll ask the author of the comments to read them. If those members who haven't submitted comments or didn't get the opportunity to submit comments, as we're going sequentially through, if you have a comment on that portion of the text, just jump right in and we'll address those comments as we get to them. Anybody have anything they want to say before we get started? All right, so this is the start of Article 6, kind of by way of introductions. Both 6 and 7 are largely carryovers from our existing land development code, which is certainly not to say that we can't change them. It's just that much of the stuff, when we did the code assessment, we didn't focus a lot on changing these sections because we felt that they were working fairly well as is. We just there's a lot more reorganization. But that being said, there's no reason why we can't change things that are in our existing code as necessary. So start off with comment number 1. That is Matthew. Do you want to discuss that? Oh, you're muted.
Did you mute it?
I did not mute Matt.
What comment is it?
It is there an order of authority responsibility that has been legally established as it relates to conflicting language direction? This is in relation to 613 conflicting regulations that basically says,
Yeah, I know in some organizations with documents, they've got things that have interrelation of responsibility and authority. And this just kind of, I don't know. I didn't know if there was some kind of set or established protocol that the city has in regards to what holds precedent.
Basically, if I'm not mistaken, it says the stricter of the two apply if there's a conflict.
it does. And it's just, why is that? So it's basically state law or federal law is on the same topic as our city ordinance, then just because whatever is the more restrictive applies. And I think that's to get us out of trouble of people pointing to us and saying, well, Maitland didn't say we had to do X, Y, and Z, but the state of Florida says you did. Then I think this is just our way of clarifying that even if the state of Florida is making you do something that the city isn't, it doesn't mean you don't have to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, this is very common language found in a lot of ordinances. That
Okay.
you have
All right.
conflicts or preemptions or whatever.
Because otherwise we would be carving out basically exemptions from state or federal law, and I don't think we want to do that. I don't think we can or want to do that. So maybe this is just like legal jargon to.
Perfect. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Comment number 2. Yeah, the page numbers are off on this section, so that's acknowledged, and we can note that. I'll start screen sharing too now that our YouTube apocalypse is over. Everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. But globally, we've noted that before, that we'll look at the page numbers when it comes time to assemble these into one document. Comment number 3. That's
It's not-
actually, oh, sorry, that's actually a typo, and I'm Kathleen, I'm glad you caught that. That should be section 7.5170, which is the engineering standards that were recently adopted by the city.
So it's not it's engineering standards, or is it easements?
Engineering, the easements are discussed in the engineering standards document,
Okay.
engineering design standards document. And that's going to be incorporated into this new land development code as an appendix.
Okay.
Comment number 4 refers to section B here.
Is this mine again?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm having some problems with the list you sent out. I don't know why my word is acting up.
Yeah, could you call, I think it helped, Barrett, if you just called out the column number or the first one, like comment
Number
50.
4. Are they not numbered? Or I can read, you can read.
I've got 49, 50, 51, 52.
Oh, did I grab the wrong?
No, this is the updated one that you sent out today, is number 4.
Oh, I renumbered them when I sent them out today to take off the old list. I'll read it. Sorry if that's confusing.
I can get I didn't realize you had combined the ones we haven't done. I didn't realize.
I did. I thought that would be easier to start off with where we left off last time as number 1, and then add the new comments to the end of the list. So sorry if that was confusing.
All right, I'm with you now.
All right. Off to a rough start this evening. My apologies. Says comment on page 6.2B, it says, don't we still have homes on septic systems? How does this requirement apply to those instances? And are you saying that if there's basically we're saying that lot size, the minimum lot size has to be 50% larger if it's on septic to account for the additional room required for the drain field? That's the thought.
Really? And is that an existing situation in the LDC?
Yeah.
The health department has minimum lot requirements if there's on septic. It's 1/4 acre for septic and half acre for well and septic. So this just kind of accomplishes that and says that you have to have a larger lot if you're still on septic.
Oh, so this is it's not served by central water and sewer.
Right.
Right.
Well, they're going to have to meet the health department requirement anyway. So they're going to have to at least be 1/4 acre with the septic.
Okay, so that answers my question. I didn't denote or really maybe interpret the and being included there. Okay, fair enough. I don't know that we have ones that are on well and septic, so.
I'm not sure we do either.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I apologize for missing that.
Comment number 5 on the following page, C. Shouldn't this just be that corner lots need to allow for appropriate setbacks from all streets? An interior lot may have the same dimensions, correct? That's an interesting comment. The reason why we require a larger width is that unlike some other jurisdictions, Maitland in our code applies on a corner lot front yard setbacks to both street side lots. So in other words, if you imagine that if you have it's going to have a smaller building envelope because you have your street side setbacks are larger
Right.
side setbacks. So when you don't have larger corner lots, you end up with somewhat significantly smaller building envelopes on those corner lots. And then that actually, we've had people come in and ask for variances because they point to their neighbors on the interior lot and say they can have a bigger house than I can. I need a variance to have a same size house as my neighbor. So that's why in our code we state that they need to have a little more area on the corner lots. That's the logic behind that.
But Matt's point's a good one. Don't you just care that they have setbacks? That they can meet their setbacks?
It's to the, yeah, they all have to meet their setbacks. That's true of all lots in a subdivision. And I think it's just the keyword here is appropriate, because otherwise they would be have a smaller buildable area than their neighbors. That's the logic behind it. We can change it.
You're assuming that an interior lot's got the minimum width then, or is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, what, even if it's not the minimum, even if it's equivalent, if it's an equal size lot, your corner lot's going to have a smaller buildable area. And that's what this is trying to accommodate. It doesn't say how much greater, but it says it has to permit appropriate building setbacks. I mean, this is not something that is,
Okay,
very, but
fair enough. I just, yeah, all good. I think it's accomplishing the same thing. I interpreted the width that is greater, maybe a little bit more literal than what, or more significant perhaps than what is intended, so.
we could change it. Do you have different wording you want to suggest?
I mean, I just don't, I mean, if they've got, if we define what the appropriate building setbacks are for corner lots, I don't know why we have to kind of stipulate that, but if you're saying it's been an issue where people are coming in and they've got, in order to accommodate in order to accommodate the setbacks, they can only build a smaller building. I mean, that's kind of life in the big city, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we could, that's not how they felt.
Because you could say it's greater and they may want to build a 5,000 square foot house and it's still not big enough. I don't know what, so
Yeah, if you think it's unnecessary,
I think it's unnecessary. I think just corner lots need to have appropriate building setbacks for orientation to all streets.
right.
so just with the understanding that purchaser is going to have a smaller buildable area because their setbacks are going to be front yard setbacks, sometimes 20 or 25 feet from two of their lot lines as opposed to just one. And if that's kind of I guess a buyer beware sort of situation, that they're going to see the same lot, and if it's a corner lot, they're going to get that, I guess. Yeah, I mean,
Anyway,
that does happen anyway. And when we apply this development standards to older portions of the city where the corner lots are the same size, then yeah, sometimes it can be.
Boynton and Hillman, corner lot, guys building a house. Maybe it's not as big as some of the others around him. I mean, that's his buildable lot.
True.
Or they have no backyard, like in Domrick.
Yeah.
Well,
I
shouldn't say
don't
no
think it's
backyard.
gonna hurt
They just have
anything
a much
to take
smaller
it out,
backyard.
because they're gonna have to do their building envelope anyway, especially with the zoning district with the minimum housing size and setback size. It's not like, I don't think they're gonna try to come in and sneak in and do a smaller lot and claim that they need a variance.
Okay.
Okay.
So 6.
Yeah, it's right there on D. So yeah, I was just confirming. So this is saying that this is a decision solely upon planning and zoning. It's not something that goes as a recommendation to city council.
Correct, because at least in the new code, and I think in the existing code, P&Z is the final decision maker on preliminary subdivision plats.
Yeah, and I saw that when I reviewed this, I hadn't looked at the 2B part, so I see that's in there. How does that path its way to planning and zoning? Does that go through DRC for recommendation, or how does it path to us?
Yes. But just how you said, it goes from DRC to planning and zoning.
There's nothing that we're gonna ask you to make a final decision on that hasn't had a DRC review and recommendation.
Okay, all right.
So H, what are undeeded areas? Well, that would just be like what we're saying, there shouldn't be any undeeded areas, but like an example of that would be is if you just had a common area, right, that was not part of a lot or a designated lot, that's undesirable.
I just didn't know there was such a thing as undeeded, and that's why I was asking. Because usually if it's you're talking about a subdivision, an HOA is probably going to own that common area or something. So that's why I didn't know. And it just hit me. I didn't know you could have undeeded land.
You shouldn't. Yeah, you're exactly right. You want that homeowner association to be in charge of the common area.
And that's what this is doing, is encouraging an HOA to maintain anything that's not part of a lot.
Yeah, it either has to be part of a lot or deeded to some entity. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
So 623A. Oh, Kathleen, were you talking about this 5 acres per 1,000?
Yes. Because if Maitland is 36,000 acres and 2,800 of them is dry, how could you even do that? That's why I was like trying to figure that one out.
I read that as appearing in here.
Yeah, our comprehensive plan adopted the 5 per 1,000 as a level of service. That's something that was recommended by PRAB when the comp plan was going through its review and was adopted. So right now we're sitting well above the 5 per 1,000. So we're good now. But that is the standard that was adopted in the comp plan.
But if your point is that you're never going to have a subdivision that adds 1,000 people, you're probably right, but it's the math. I mean, it's half an acre per 100 people.
It's the overall level of service.
It's the overall level of service, right? And then you get into the next page where it talks about, per dwelling unit, right? So it's like 2 acres per every 100 dwelling units for a single family.
Okay. Like I said, I just was trying to understand how that you've explained it.
Okay. It's just math in this case. So Glenn, your next comment belongs to you on 11. It's number 2, fees in lieu of land. Please explain how this fee is established. Is this takings? It's because that's the level of service. It's not takings where they're required to meet that level of service. So they can either provide that acreage themselves or pay the city to acquire it and have it offsite.
Okay. And I certainly knew that it couldn't be, but I just was curious of the interpretation.
Generally, when a subdivision comes in, they can either provide the own parkland themselves, or they can just pay a fee in lieu of, and it becomes part of a city pot that goes into city parks and regional and community parks.
But Barrett, you skipped, was number 9 not in order?
I'm sorry, I guess not. I'm having a rough night. Number 9, page 6.3.
And you stop me if I'm misinterpreting the language of this. And I mentioned Shell Point. Actually, as soon as I wrote it, I thought not Shell Point, take Lake Catherine. And if somebody's on a lake, my interpretation of this was if somebody's on a lake, they have to be 50, the lot must be a 50-foot setback from the established high water. But throughout the area, if it's not sovereign submerged land, and even if it is, your lot has to go up to the edge of the other lot. And this around Lake Catherine, in fact, the problem has just come up because a guy has asked to do a dock and his lot doesn't actually go all the way to the water. And that water line is deeded to somebody else or they don't own it. And so if you don't go to the water and you want to put a dock in, the problem is coming now from a legalese standpoint is, hey, you don't actually own up to the water, so you can't build a dock. So my interpretation of this was you have to have your lot set back from the water, from the normal high water, and that didn't make sense to me.
No, that's not the intent here. It's the structure. It's the structure has to be set back 50 feet.
If a lakefront lot means any lot that touches the lake, so the structures on that lot have to be set back 50 feet unless it's something like you indicated, a boat dock where they get a waterfront structure permit.
Okay, but this says the lot.
It says lakefront lots shall have a minimum setback. So lakefront lots meaning that any lot.
Not the lot itself, but
Correct,
you
not the
mean
lot line, but a lot.
anyone on the water. Okay, then I go back to Shell Point that they're not 50-foot setback. Nor, and those aren't the only ones. I think you can go down the Howe Branch Canal. There's a few occasions you can go down Minnehaha Lane and the guy's got a canal, call it ditch, but it's water. Normal high water is there and it's closer than 50 feet from his house.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's going to be some non-conforming uses with this because there are houses where there's lots with houses on them that are closer than 50 feet, and there have been for many, many years. So
Are these new lots established, or are we making all these people non-conforming?
No, this isn't. Well, this provision is in the existing subdivision code. And this is if you're subdividing, basically you're going to write on your plat, on your subdivision plat, that all structures, all dwellings, accessory structures, not accepting lots, accepting docks, have to be set back 50 feet from the high water line, not the lot lines. This is by definition they're a lakefront lot if they high water line is a part of their lot.
Okay.
And I agree this could be worded better. So if it's okay, we could probably add some language to clarify that it applies to structures that aren't waterfront structures.
Yeah, for their 50 feet from the established high water for their structures or something to that effect.
like Barry said, that's what our existing code is now for a
Yeah.
divided lot.
No, and look, I read it and if it didn't make sense to me, that means nothing.
True. It does read, I agree. It does kind of read like the lots have to be set back from the water. And then you're like, well, who owns the 50 feet?
And that was my interpretation. If you were establishing lots that, so enough said. Yep.
Got it. Okay. So 9, next is 10. 6.4 C1A.
Yeah, I'm a little ignorant around how this really works, right? So I read it. I don't know that I understand it, but up above, hold on a second. So my comment was specifically made relative to C1A, where it says subdivisions with primary single-family detached dwellings, 2 acres of land per every 100 dwelling units. So that's just a ratio? Is that the reality?
Yeah. So for every 100 lots, you have to dedicate 2 acres of land, or the payment in lieu is the value of the 2 acres of land. Okay,
so that sets it, and then the kind of the intro into it, the land specified in the comprehensive plan, it states that I'm looking up at B1A, 6.2.3 B1A. If the land designated as a park or recreation facility within the proposed development is 1 acre or greater, the developer shall be required to dedicate the land in accordance with this section. If it's less, it may or may not require fee in lieu of land. I guess I was just kind of had it reversed in my brain as to what the kind of the governing kind of criteria is. So that's a ratio, the 2 per 100 developable lots. If it's 75 lots, then it would be the appropriate ratio, correct?
Correct, yeah, so if you get a 10 lot subdivision coming in, you're doing 0.2 acres.
0.2 acres, okay, and then it would
And then the city council may require that
be,
it can't be a private park, in other words, right? Or they have to pay into a city park.
right, okay, fair enough, thank you.
Mhm.
It's just sometimes not having the conversation, and I start reading and I start kind of confusing myself about some of this stuff, so I appreciate the discussion.
Absolutely, no problem.
It's our fault for assuming that everybody knows it, because we deal with this every day, so we just assume that it makes sense to everyone, even though it logically doesn't. I know my wife would go crazy reading this
Every day, right?
Oh, and
exactly.
often we've already talked about this 4 or 5 times, so we're like, well, of course it means that, because we've had these discussions internally before, so,
Sure.
yeah, we understand, good to remember. Okay, so we've done 9, we've done 10. Now we've done to 11, which we kind of already talked about when it's already out of order. Does that make,
No, I'm good. So I'm 12 too, though. Storm drainage, what if the city doesn't have an established system? And there are some occasions where we know that's the case, so. And I
yeah,
think this talked a lot about you had to have it.
there was a,
Which one are we on? Number 12?
Number 12, 6-7 dash. I forget if that was the page number.
yeah, it is, and it's.
So what was the question?
If you bring me to the statement, the specific 6-7, and it said,
B,
where
that's
storm-
not covered. Here we go. You were talking about this B, right?
yeah, so all drainage facilities shall be designed for a positive outfall to existing stormwater systems in accordance. I just said, what if there isn't one?
Then they have to provide the stormwater on site.
Okay.
Yeah, because is that covered by C?
So, there's some places we have, like, I think there's a subdivision on Ventures that doesn't have a positive outfall, so they could either create the positive outfall, or they can accommodate 100% of the stormwater on site, the retention ponds.
Yep. And interest, of course, is a good example, but I don't think 100% of the water is theirs.
Correct, they have to do 100% of their pre-post. So
Right.
their pre can't exceed the post.
Okay, I'm good.
Number 13, B, is this master drainage plan including a report document? I don't know the answer to that, Dan. Do you know? Or Harris?
I do not know. I
Master
think
drainage
this,
plan.
the Public Works maintains a master stormwater plan, but it's not a bad idea to reference it by the exact name of what it is.
That's what I was, yeah, that's basically what I was asking for, right? Let's
Yeah.
make it.
We can add the actual title and the date it was approved or whatever.
Right,
We
perfect.
reference it.
Yeah, because I thought Lakes Advisory had, at one point, we had looked in wanting a main, like a mapping of all the stormwater at one point.
We are working on that now.
There you go.
All right. Next one is number 14 on 6.8, 6.3.8A. I think that's a missing word.
Maybe it's just an ad shall be provided as the public works director determines they should be required. I just think it reads funny, but even on top of that, I mean, that there's design standards that govern that. I don't know that we should be like, I don't know. I just feel like the public works director determining that there's design standards that define that. And maybe it's a conversation that needs to be had with her, but that's just seems a little bit odd. Particularly as it relates to bridges and culverts. I don't know that that any public works director would want that to be on their opinion.
Right.
Where guardrails and fences are provided, especially guardrails, that's a safety thing. You want to have the reference to an established design document. Is my thought.
Is that, Matt, do you know if that's covered in the green book?
Yeah, it should be covered in the green book.
Okay, maybe we just reference if warranted by green book. Or
It's
whatever.
been a long time since I've looked at the green book though, but generally speaking, it should be referenced in there.
Okay. That's a good catch.
So what is the green book?
It's a FDOT design guidelines.
For like roads and.
Yeah, for kind of local facilities. It's not for state facilities. State facilities use kind of a higher level design criteria, but it was years ago, it was kind of grandfathered in that the local communities and municipalities could continue to utilize a little bit older criteria, but typically their facilities are lower speed and whatnot, so it makes sense.
Definitely something you don't want to Google and start reading at night, Catherine.
Thank you.
It'll put you to sleep faster than
You never know.
any melatonin.
I'll just call Matthew if I have any questions about the green book.
Faster than an LDC?
This LDC is awesome. It's a page turner.
And that, unless anybody has anything else, that concludes Article 6. Next is Article 7, which is about public facility funding, which is mobility.
Did we miss 15?
Did I?
Yeah, 15 is it's the same. It's similar to that other one I was asking about, that we have the recommendation. So the same, it has to do with subdivision. So I understand it now, but I do have a question. I just don't remember. Have we had one of these in the last couple of years that we went straight to a decision on something? I just don't remember an example of that.
Not in the last couple of years, because the old code put everything through council at the end.
Okay.
This new code is kind of dividing the responsibilities between council, P and Z, and staff on certain things that are more appropriate at those levels.
Okay, that's why I think it caught me odd, and I even was having that same when I was reading through the 2B, so that answers that.
Okay, now we're moving on to number 7. Thank you for the help. I'm doing really poor facilitation today. I'm gonna try to turn over the leaf in Article 7 and improve. It's not like I was celebrating St. Patrick's Day or anything.
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna say you had too many green beards.
I didn't. I promise. I don't have any St. Patrick's celebrations yesterday. Maybe that's why I'm doing that.
We could put in an LDC that P and Z can determine to drug test employees at any time.
Poor facilitation of workshops. Yeah. It's the bad luck of the Irish for not celebrating St. Patrick's Day appropriately.
I'll go ahead and pencil that into 2B for a comment next week.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Article 7. Kathleen, you had a question about the mobility fee in addition to an impact fee. What is the formula for money? It is the impact fee for transportation, essentially. And there is a formula based on a study. I was going to ask Matt, were you on Transportation Advisory Board when the mobility fee study was conducted? We couldn't remember it internally.
Yes, I was.
You want to tell us about the mobility fees?
Please don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that it was a new concept to me. I've since had, a little bit of exposure as different, cities and counties have kind of implemented. And so I'm definitely not an expert, right? But the way I recall it was presented and the way it was discussed and the way I'm, kind of somewhat familiar with it is, it basically is a replacement of the traffic impact fees. Oftentimes with the development, a developer would come in and be required to provide a traffic report and show what impacts the development is having on the surrounding roadways, particularly the immediately adjacent roadways. And then as part of their agreement, they would have to make the improvements or pay for those said improvements. What typically happens, right, is you'll never see a developer. I mean, most developers' traffic reports are going to say it doesn't impact the existing traffic at all, which we all know is not true. So the thought around mobility fees was that it was going to be a kind of established menu of impacts and costs that would then be incurred by the developer based on their development and their proposed development, would go to the city for the city to utilize as it saw fit for a number of it didn't have to be specifically utilized as it relates to the impacts of that particular development. It could be utilized in other ways and forms. So that's kind of the extent of my knowledge. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's very good. So Matt, you're basically, and I agree with your statement where you said they do the traffic studies and it never impacts. You know, it always, the impacts, you know, the traffic impact, oh, it doesn't impact it and we're good.
Right.
But this is actually putting up a menu of fees.
Right.
That I don't want to say circumvents, but they don't have a choice. Is that more what I'm?
Kathleen, the mobility fee, what it did is it replaced transportation impact fees, and it allows us to spend money on more than just traffic or traffic signals. We can actually spend money on sidewalks or greenway trails, things like that can all be part of mobility fees, because the idea is that it's multi-mobility, not just traffic transportation impacts, it's multi-mobility impacts. Right. So it allows us to spend the money a little bit differently, and it's based on different zones of the city. We actually do this report, we're budgeted next year to have to redo it again, because we have to redo it every 5 years, do that study to determine what the going rate fees are based on the impacts.
Right.
Okay, no, I mean, no, like Matt, you said, this is a good conversation because it clarifies exactly what it is. And I've already read several articles about communities that are already doing this. So it wasn't new to me. It was just more of understanding how it's being implemented or what it's replacing but no. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And then the next one was the copy of the report from July of 2016. Hang on. Oh, okay. So just at that next, that bottom paragraph there in 7-1. And that's what you're, Dan, is that what you're just talking about? That it's done every 5 years and it has to be redone?
Correct. So it's budgeted for next year's budget. It's 5 or 7 years. It might be 7 years if the last one was 2016, but it is definitely slated to be redone next year.
And updated. And that's basically, these are kind of the results of that study, right? Where they calculated impacts and where this fee schedule came from. And I assume that report is just, I haven't actually read it myself, but I assume it's just a much longer, more documented version.
It's a very technical, boring report. But so when that report is done next year, however long it takes to do it, we're going to obviously have to amend this code and amend that section with the new fee rates and all that.
So is there language that we need to put in there that says it will be updated?
Well, so there's two ways to do it. We could say as amended from time to time.
Okay.
And not have the table in there, but the fact that in this version, the table is in there showing the exact fee, then we could either update the fees and reference the new one. I'd have to check to see if we have to put the fees in the code or if we can just reference the study.
Well, and I just wanted to make sure we covered ourselves, like you said, as to be updated from time to time, or whatever the correct language is, I don't know. And that's why I get nervous when we reference a certain date timestamp thing. And that's why I just want to make sure we're not locking ourselves into something. And it gives us the flexibility to update it, like you said, as needed or as called for.
Yeah, updates to the fees happen on a well, I shouldn't say a regular basis, but for instance, the Sewer fees got updated back in 2018. When the ordinance gets passed, the code gets updated, and that will be the same case for the mobility fees when the update happens next year.
Okay, thank you, Harris.
You're welcome.
That was essentially my same comment on 19, Barrett. We kind of killed two birds with one stone there.
Okay. Great, and there was a question about the map, and the map is going to be in here. That's the placeholder where it shows the 3 areas. That was comment 20. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip around, but that just kind of jumped out at me. We're at 20. Okay. Did we skip over comment 18?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, 18. About the accessory structure.
There's nothing in there about ADUs? Is that the comment?
Well, if you're say you build a garage with an apartment and then you rent the apartment out, then you're increasing the person trips, or you're adding another person to that property. Are you not adding to it? And that's why I'm asking. It's not on the chart.
Yeah, and anytime you add a dwelling unit, we charge that mobility fee. So if you have an existing dwelling unit, you tear it down and do a new one, then there's no fee because it's assumed a wash. But if you have a house and you created a duplex or an above a garage apartment that's deemed a dwelling unit, then they get assessed an impact fee for that.
So just a curiosity question, is it a impact fee plus a mobility since it's a new structure?
No, it's a mobility fee. That's what you.
Okay. I just was asking.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. That's true. 19. Where did 19? Where did 19? Okay. All right. And then maps 20, we covered that. The administrator, couple folks, that's public works director.
So yeah, the impact or the mobility fees, what happens is we calculate the mobility fees when it comes to the building permits. And the mobility fees get collected and go into a fund, and then the fund gets administered by the public works director, basically through the CIP.
Okay, so there's really technically no administrator per se.
No, it goes into the CIP. It's the pot of money, just like a park impact fee. There's not one person that determines how to spend all the money. It's usually a council adopted program or project that.
But Dan, they're talking about here, I think, are you saying that you are the mobility fee administrator, if it's the community development department or designee? Because it says this is probably about who's determining what the fee is, using the closest land.
Yeah, it's not about who processes it or prioritizes the spending. It's who does the calculation, right?
So. Yeah, that would generally go to me. I'm not sure why it's not in there, but if there's a use that doesn't match up exactly with that table, then we would make kind of like a zoning determination. We would make a determination what's the most applicable use that's similar impacts, and that's how we would determine it. And then of course
the question is mobility fee administrator, is that an official city title?
No.
Then why don't we reference the person that's actually going to do it rather than?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
I think that's.
It's confusing.
Yeah,
Totally. Okay.
we like to wear multiple hats.
Next one, comment 22 on page 9, B1.
Oh,
Barrett, that comment is community development director or or their designee.
Should be or designee.
Are you
Yeah.
volunteering, Harris?
Well, I already do it for you, so.
Okay.
I'm just trying to be helpful.
So Harris, you're really the mobility fee administrator.
I guess you could say that. It's a collaborative process, but I lead the charge.
Oh,
so I get my question around that number 22, right? Is that average approach that we, if we've appraised it one way and then the developer who's got this designation appraises it a different way, we just go to the average? Is that the process that we use now?
oh, I think so. Yeah. I don't know if we've ever had to do this before.
And that was kind of my next question, right here. Is it even, I think my question also was, is this the legal process for adjudicating differences? And I mean, maybe it is, but I guess the other question to that point is do we ever even have this situation happen?
Not that I can recollect.
I don't think so. Yeah, this is.
Okay.
So this is a credit for a mobility fee?
Yeah.
So generally what we would do is take the cost of the improvement that was done. So like, for instance, an example, if Gem Lake puts in their bike path and they're getting mobility credits for it because they're paying for the whole construction of it,
Right.
they would go out and they would get bids of the cost of what it would be. And we would take an average of the bids, and that would be the mobility credit that they would get for doing the improvement themselves.
But he's saying the applicant gets it, and then if we disagree with it, if the applicant comes back and says, right, this is worth $2 million, and we say we have one that says this is worth $1 million,
Right.
This say the value is 1.5 million, which is the average.
Yeah, it has not happened in the time I've been here. I don't know if it's ever happened, but it's something we can look into.
Yeah, I think we can look into with the update.
Yeah, I mean, again, they could, to your example on Gem Lake, right? Somebody could game the system if that was really. I mean,
Well,
private developer is not required to get multiple bids on what he's going to construct, right?
no, but what would happen is our public works director would do an estimate as well, and they would determine that, no, this is really overinflated, or this sounds about right. So the public works director reviews all of those project bids and determines whether it's good or not.
Right, but then what I'm saying is, so let's just use math, right? Public works director says it's $100,000. The developer says, oh, I paid $300,000 for it. And now you do the average, and you're gonna give them a $200,000 credit.
Is the I mean, it has to be, is that why this language about the appraiser's accreditation is in here, that it can't just be the developer, it has to be a hired professional appraiser? Is that how they're trying to guard against that?
We'd have to look into that, because we've never gone to that
Fair.
level where we've had to hire appraisers. Usually a developer will say, I'll go ahead and put in this road. It's going to cost me $2 million, and public works director will run the cost and say, no, actually, that's really only about a $1.8 million.
And looking at this carefully, this is just for land. If it's an improvement, if it's an offsite improvement, it's cost estimates here, and then we can require them to competitively bid.
Right.
The improvements.
So that is just the land up there. Okay, so yeah, it just, we want to protect ourselves from not the folks that are looking to do things on the up and up, but it's maybe the extenuating circumstance that could be out there. And I just want to make sure that we're protected, really.
And I think a good example of number one, now that we're reading it, a good example of number one is say, the BB&T, or not the BB&T, but the Harris, with Wells Fargo Bank gets redeveloped, that whole, and they're looking at it, the whole property gets redeveloped, and we're asking them to extend Independence Lane up north. They're gonna say, wait a minute, you're taking 60 feet of our property, that's worth $10 million. And so that's where we have to get the appraiser to come in and give a fair appraisal value of it.
Right.
Whereas, and I guess you couldn't really impose the multiple bid.
Right, not on the value of the
Not
property.
value of the property.
But I still go back then to the average calculation, right? Because again, I'm not familiar with, the MIA designation for Appraisal Institute, but to the point of the conversation of no developer's traffic report has ever shown a need for traffic improvements adjacent to their property. If I'm a developer, I'm going to get a MIA designated appraiser that's going to, I would imagine, right? I mean, if I'm a developer, that's what I would do. So I don't know. I just, if you guys feel comfortable with it, I guess I just want to make sure we're protected.
Yeah, I mean, on the flip side, the city could hire an appraiser that says that their 60 feet for Independence Lane is worth, $10,000. They would probably object to that as well.
Yeah, I mean well, they could, right? I've never seen that happen on the municipal side, right? I mean, I don't know. I haven't. At least not in Central, maybe South Florida.
In Harris and Barrett, my time here, this has never been used.
Okay.
But I could see that if they get an appraisal and the appraiser was paid handsomely to give them a good number, then the city would say, wait, that sounds way too high. We'd hire our own appraiser. And whether the average is the right number or it just goes into some kind of negotiation might be.
Yeah, I'm wondering how else. I mean, you could get yeah, we can look at it. I mean,
this is our chance to fix it, right? This is our chance to
Absolutely.
modify.
Yeah, it's definitely worth looking at.
Yeah.
And do we have a real estate director or other such title that specifically deals in like real estate transactions for the city?
Yeah.
So in my experience, there's in larger municipalities, and it's totally fair that we don't have one on staff, that person and or their legal team would be who this would come to. And there would be some kind of negotiation and both parties would typically do an appraisal for the, the use on the site, the potential development, all sorts of things. But it does typically come into negotiation that the legal department is involved in. So if there's maybe a way to like make that more clear within the language, that might help assuage some concern.
If it's P&Z's ultimate recommendation, obviously not tonight because you're not making a recommendation, but if it's your ultimate recommendation that rather than taking an average, it goes into a negotiation where, where legal fees are, or pass-through fees or whatever are done, we can come up with some language. If the intent is that that you guys don't want to recommend a average, but more of a negotiation, we can come up with some language. The closest we have right now is just a magic 8-ball.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take away from what Matt is saying, because I think that there's always that possibility that you're going to come in with such a high number in order to get that average that you want. But then at the same time, do we want to like pigeonhole ourselves into a negotiation? I don't know. Just thought I would put it out there.
yeah, because if they're really close, an average wouldn't be that bad. But if they're really wide apart, just thinking about it, I don't know. You don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be, or to not have a clear-cut way of arriving at the value. But at the same time, you also don't want to protect this game in the system. So that's a tricky one.
Yeah. And then I had a comment on number 2 as well that kind of sprang up during this conversation. So one thing that I feel like is left out is the cost of design. We're only referencing the cost of the actual construction.
Right? Fair enough. Yeah.
So again, to guess draw on my experience, that number, that overall number would be negotiated before entering into an agreement for the offsite improvements. So those bids, you know, an estimator might put together bids or what have you. So you have an idea before you actually enter into an agreement with the developer as to what the total amount allowable for design and construction costs would be and how you would disperse that through the credit.
Can you do that? Okay, if we use Jim Lake as an example and you know, we're talking about it now, we're approving it now. It's a long way to go before that bike trail is put in completely. So is it possible to have those estimates in place?
Or
Tricky because they can sort of, you know, it has a lifespan to it if the construction isn't done within a certain period of time.
Use the one we've talked about though as an example. We're saying the mobility credits as part of his agreement would happen now. Is it realistic? And Barrett and, you know, you guys are dealing with them. Is it realistic that you could get those costs this early? He doesn't know all the final plans yet.
Design costs, yes.
Well, you meant, no, well,
Flexibility.
Yeah,
It's construction that gets tricky.
right.
I mean, structure it as like a 2-part or 2-phase deal where maybe there's like a cap on the overall. There's a lot of ways I think you could approach it, and it depends on the project and the complexity. And
yeah, I think it does get more difficult, the more complex it is and the further out it is. But again, this is a credit that you're calculating at the time of, but this is collected at the time of building permit application. So they would, theoretically, they would be constructing these as part of the permit. So it's never going to be too far off, I don't think.
Yeah, if it's that late, you're right, in the cycle.
Yeah, he's not, for example, we're using that example, Jim Lake, we haven't calculated his impact fees credits yet. Right, Harris?
Correct.
Correct, right, Dan?
Correct.
Okay, I didn't think so. So that's happening later in the process when it is a little bit closer to construction. So that's a good point. All right. So
I presume you want to make sure you're calculating it based on what's finally being done, correct?
yeah, absolutely. That's true because the design could change.
Right.
All right. So comment number 23 on 712. C. Ooh, that's a good question. I think so, Kathleen. I think you're right. The comment is, why are these funds not available for operation? Because there's no continuous funding source.
Correct, because that's always been a problem with any of the, you know, like the link system and whatnot. There's just no dedicated funding source, you know, to keep some of this stuff going. And that was why I wanted to know why it was written that way.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're trying to keep these for infrastructure and not operating expenses, just to keep, the temptation would be to raid this fund, I guess, to use operating expenses. Is the question that might be appropriate, or why isn't that allowed?
Right. And that was why I was asking. So for infrastructure versus operation.
Well, in a most, if not all, I think well, if not all, maybe all, impact fees are based on the initial purchase. They're not based on continuing operation and maintenance. So like the fire impact fee, you can't charge a fee based on how it's gonna cost to hire 3 new firemen and pay them for 5 years down the road. It's always just the initial cost of the impact.
Okay. So like you literally have a separate bank account for this, quote unquote, or a,
Yeah, I think we do.
okay,
Yeah, we have multiple separate bank accounts.
okay.
We call them charge codes, but
Ferris does a bake sale.
And I'm sure it's just accounted for.
Okay, thank you.
Next comment is 24 on 714.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what Dan was saying earlier. It is every 5 years according to this section, Dan.
Okay, I thought it was in there. I was scanning through this and I was looking. I was pretty
Yeah.
sure it did specify. that.
And again, this was my comment. It probably was either late at night or early in the morning when I was making this. You know, this is a long section. So I just want, when it said section, right, I just wanted, we're talking about the mobility fee section, which
Yes.
presuming to be the case. It just at this point, we're down to section, sub-article 15 on it. It got pretty lengthy and a lot of pages, so.
Yeah. Yep. This section, right? The book. Yeah.
So it looks like somebody's got a lot of work to do between now and July, right?
Well, they're not doing a whole new one. Luckily they're just having to update the existing ones.
Got it.
Maybe it's a little less work.
Okay, perfect.
Next is comment 25 on 716.
Yeah, so this one, it just basically says the city shall evaluate the petition and submit a recommendation. What is, and I've seen it in this document a few times, it says the city. So who's actually the responsible party there? I mean,
City manager, I would think, if it says the city. Where we at? Are we
Should
on?
should we be specific?
Which section?
We are on page top of 216, 716.
Very top.
Yeah. It's about vested rights. You're talking about vested rights. Am I going to the correct place?
Yes.
Basic. I guess we can't put, basically the city that makes that determination is the public works director. It's basically DRC. We take a look at it at the request for vested rights and we make a recommendation. So the city is then making a recommendation to the council whether to approve it or not.
But I mean, isn't the nature of this document to tell you who's doing what? And I mean, unless we define somewhere what because we use this term throughout, and I'm afraid it means different things for different people.
Well, in 2B, if you remember, you get to administration, right? So then I think vested rights determination was one of the things, was one of the processes where then it does specify who has decision-making authority. Because I think it's actually multiple parties, right? And that's why maybe the shorthand is the city. Let me see.
So if I read this document, who do I call?
For a vested rights determination?
It's the
Yeah.
city.
Yeah, that's my fault. I put that soft one out there.
Yeah.
Just call the main switchboard number line. Somebody will
Yeah.
pick it.
I want to speak to the city, please.
Everybody will say, that's not my job. You got to transfer to this department and they'll transfer to another department.
Well, see, that's why I thought that was why they wrote it this way, so you could pass it around.
Yeah. I think, at least in the past, it was a community development director. I don't recall what the new one
I'm looking at it.
says.
The vested rights determination, if we look in our table, DRC makes a recommendation,
Okay.
then it actually goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a public hearing and recommendation. And then the decision is at a public hearing by City Council.
So we can change the city to DRC just to be consistent with that table.
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes it's appropriate to sort of generic because but this is like giving you a specific action.
We definitely didn't want to say the applicant shall evaluate the petition.
Or maybe just even make a reference to, because the thing is, it's not just, we don't want to give the impression that it's only Development Review Committee and not P and Z. So maybe we could do either say Development Review Committee or refer to Article 2. Because Article 2 does lay out that there's the specific procedure for, and you guys haven't seen that yet. That's in Module 2B. That's
Yeah,
later.
and that's fine if you want to reference it that way, just so somebody knows what they need to do.
Because otherwise, yeah, I think that's the point of, otherwise without getting into it here. Okay. Now we're moving to chickies, right? There was this definitions. Keith, this was, your comment was there's basically definitions in here that weren't referenced in the text.
Yeah, I didn't see them. I didn't remember them.
There was definitely some that they, in a footnote, they definitely talk about removing some definitions from here that didn't appear. I did not go, and I don't think anybody on our staff went and double checked that, so that might be a good thing to do.
About all these definitions.
Yeah, double check that all.
I know chickies in there because that caught my attention as what is a chickie?
But
So
would you find
chickies
that
is referenced somewhere?
it's referenced in the floodplain administration section, but I think just as a global comment, we need to double check that all definitions.
Yeah.
If something's defined in the definitions section, it needs to actually appear in the text somewhere.
I mean, I like the chickies in there. Actually, we can keep it in because it raises our vocabulary just a little bit.
It definitely did for us when we read that, because I did not know about, not growing up in Florida, I did not know about Seminole architecture, native architecture. Speaking of that, I'm gonna let Matt handle comment 27.
No, that was me just being silly.
I know.
It just made me laugh. I'm scrolling through all the definitions and there's no other graphics, but there's one of a billboard, so.
Was that a slightly sarcastic?
Slightly.
and
Yeah, well, I just didn't know if we could get a credit from the consultant of that and use that graphic in another. I got some other areas where I'd like to use another graphic, so.
Well, a little bit of inside baseball, a little bit of how the sausage is made. It was actually our community development director who provided that graphic. So he gets all the credit.
So why that's there and there's nothing else really there is we had graphics for all the different sign types.
Uh-huh.
And I guess, isn't all signs here?
All
So-
signs do get, do have a picture associated with them.
Most of them.
Many of them do. If they were not used in the sign section, a lot of times in the definition section, they get.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Oh,
No, and I look, that was the first one I came to in this section, so I didn't repeat that comment throughout, but that was
well,
just.
we will, we appreciate the kind words. Always. Thank you for
Fair.
that.
Keep it light.
The green, Dan noticed the green book is defined in here. That came up earlier.
Oh, okay.
It's on 11.8.
Yep.
American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Policy on geometric signs. Well, that's very good. We all learned something today. I learned. I did
Well,
not.
but now, Dan, that there's a difference between. I'm getting into kind of craziness, but there's a difference between the AASHTO Green Book and the Florida Green Book. So what you guys follow is the Florida Green Book. Correct me if I'm wrong, and that may be something you want
Good catch.
to confirm or concur with the Public Works Director. Two different documents.
I learned something new. I didn't know there was a difference.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Here. Okay. Unless we have any other comments on the definitions, I think we can pat ourselves on the back for finishing module 2. Right? Like,
Yep.
Excellent. So that brings us to module 2B, which a lot of it, what we'll look at today, is the administration portion. And I have to thank Glenn for serving up a perfect introductory question for 2B that we can talk about what we're going to kind of the overall purpose of this. Glenn's comment was, hey, you know, what can you give us an overview of the changes that we're making? Administration, Mayland has had a reputation for many years of not being developer friendly and having an overly cumbersome process. Are these items addressed?
Yes.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you asked. No, as a matter, they are. We talked a lot about that. That was one of the main issues we talked about with the consultants, and one of the biggest changes from our existing land development code to this land development code is kind of reflected here in Article 2. Because there's a lot of repetition in our existing code. A lot of our processes are repeated. So for a site plan review, you have this, it says, this is your process, this is your application requirements, this is what happens, then this, then this, then this, and this. And they'll say the next section is a conditional use. Oh, well, conditional use is this is A, B, C, D, E, and F. And they're very similar, but not quite. And it's very confusing and repetitious. So what they decided to do is create standard review processes. So that instead of it just repeating it for each section, we've standardized it. There's a table which summarizes it. And there's just more clarity regarding the application requirements and what happens. So we also tried to streamline the process. So a lot of the things, if you remember from P&Z, one of what we've heard over and over again was really frustrating about the current process is this first community meeting where it goes to Planning and Zoning Commission. Staff hasn't reviewed the application yet. The applicant shows up to the community meeting, and then Planning and Zoning Commission has to not only make the recommendations to DRC, but also to debate whether or not they want to see the application again. And we thought this is just an awkward, inefficient process. So instead, we've kind of codified when they don't have to have a community meeting. And then Planning and Zoning Commission will not be looking at items until DRC and staff has looked at it and is able to give kind of a coherent explanation of an analysis of the application. So in other words, we've standardized it, we tried to streamline it, and we've just kind of hopefully made it more clear what responsibility lies whether it stops at DRC, whether it stops at P&Z, or whether it stops at City Council, instead of having this kind of circular loop-de-loop decision process of recommendations. That's what we attempted to do, and that's kind of I think what you'll see as you get into Article 2 is a more kind of user-friendly, hopefully a user-friendly code that's more clear to the development community, the actual advisory boards, and staff, and it's more standardized. So everybody kind of gets the same treatment. Do anybody else want to chime in on that, Harris or Dan?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Barrett's 100% right. A lot of what we were doing initially in the code rewrite was trying to find ways to streamline and make things easier. Some of that being, as Barrett said, ending things at P&Z or DRC, or not making every project go to a council meeting, because that adds another month or two of a process, which then is costly, is timely, and a lot of things don't serve a purpose. Some of the things about adding staff administrative variations instead of having to go through a $300 variance where they're going to get denied anyway for a 2-foot setback difference or something like that. Things like that have been added in there, timeframes on there saying that we're not going to sit there and hold on to an application forever. We got a review process that's sped up that takes them to DRC faster, and if they don't get it right, they're not going to just sit there and get turned back and forth. They're either going to get a denial recommendation or they're going to move forward and have it right. So there's a lot of things in here that are built to speed up the process and eliminate repetitive or nonsensical delays in projects.
Yeah, we've simplified the site plan review process. Right now, for some reason, I've never seen this anywhere else, conditional uses and site plan review are the same process, and it's quite confusing. If you look at the flow chart for what happens for a site plan review, there's like 8 different paths that can possibly take depending on where and how it's being done. So this is drastically separates that. That's very frustrating for applicants and for staff trying to figure out which process to go in a site plan review. It's kind of also the plan development procedure has also changed quite a bit to make it quite a bit more straightforward. Instead of, you will no longer see the option 1, option 2 distinction. Now it's just all a plan development, and a plan development to site plan review to site permit. So there's a lot of changes. So I'm glad you asked, but it's all that's very much what we were trying to do. And there's even more changes that you'll notice in there, but that's kind of the broad overview of what we're getting into.
And Harris, I don't know if you're about to add anything, but I mean, I appreciate everything you're saying, and we've probably all talked about it separately than a discussion like this, where it has worked against us. I've often pointed out that for some reason, a developer never seems to go twice in Maitland. And that goes hand in hand with a lot of the things that you're saying. It became so difficult that when somebody experienced us, they never came back. But so I appreciate everything you guys appear to be addressing and everything you're saying. And we all would, I would expect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we put a lot of thought and effort into this portion of the code, and it's pretty long, but it's at least all in one place. Like it's hard to maybe express as you're using the code as an existing form. It's very difficult to flip through and find the appropriate procedure, and you're reading it through, and it's slightly different for each process. And this consolidated approach is going to make it much more transparent and easier for people to understand. It's like, I think the developers, Glenn, to your point, a lot of times their experience is that they can't understand what the process is up front. And so they feel like we're changing the rules on them. Because we can't even sometimes explain the process. They're like, well, we don't know what's going to happen when you get to this point. It'll either be path A or path B. And that just seems shady, right? If they're like, well, what do you mean you can't explain what's going to happen? And we're like, that's just how our code's written. And this hopefully tries to eliminate that. So it's very clear and transparent what the steps are. And it's going to be the same for everybody.
And option 1 versus option 2 is not that old. And that was our attempt to try and make it easier and less expensive and supposedly less painful to find out if somebody was headed down the right track. But you're saying that goes away because this is addressing those in a much bigger way than what option 1 and option 2 ever accomplished.
Well, not just, it doesn't only apply to plan development. It also applies to site plan review and all these other application processes. And it does essentially makes everything more of a type 1 plan development. Like there's no really such distinction because everything is now going to be a type 1, and they're going to follow the site plan review process after they get their plan development approval.
So that they don't have to come in with a full set of engineered drawings before they even know whether or not the city will accept the whole, whatever the plan is.
Correct. They still have the option of coming in fully engineered, but the problem with the existing code is the type 1 and type 2 were almost identical in what you had to submit. And unless we waived it. So it was just kind of a pain because it wasn't very conceptual, and PDs should be very conceptual just to get your entitlements. Then you come in for the site plan to make sure it works. And so You either come in now with just a conceptual PD, or you come in with a PD with full-blown site plan and try to run through the process faster. But I think that you're right. A lot of the complaint was we have to put a lot of engineering dollars into something. And that's kind of the same thing with the existing conditional use process. We required right now, we require a fully engineered site plan to go with the conditional use. And a conditional use is just that, it's a use. I'm asking to do this use, not a site plan. I'm asking to do this use. So we've separated out a conditional use versus a site plan. They're two different processes now.
And this.
Well, and fully engineered before I know if I get permission to do it.
Correct. So Dan talked about this before. It adds a little more flexibility because it adds this whole new relief mechanism of an administrative adjustment procedure where up to 15% of development standards can be adjusted at staff level at DRC, as opposed to having to go through the variance process, which has a very high standard to achieve to actually get awarded that variance. So that was done. There was, interestingly enough, a lot of the different procedures had their own way to appeal. And it was different for what process it was for an appeal to city council. So this new process establishes one way that things get appealed to city council. I just want to see if we touched on, I think, all of the other changes that we've made. Map amendments for the comp plan get changed. The notice provisions have been consolidated. So before you had slightly different ways and timelines for public notice, depending on what procedure you were using. Now it's all consolidated. And I think those are, I think we've hit on everything else. Did you want to add anything, Harris? You're muted.
No, I didn't. I think you all covered it pretty well. This is a real good effort for the city to help us be able to administer the code, and also a process that's going to really help bring business and people that want to create quality development in the city of Maitland.
And so that being said, on comment 29, right off the bat, Matt questions our new organization. It says, do we want to have the table right at the front? Which I think is a fair point. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it seems weird because well, I'm not going to anticipate what your issue is. I want to hear what your issue is.
To me, again, and I'm not a developer, right? So it's not that I'm familiar with reading these like Dan and others, right? But I felt like typically I like to see, before I see the summary, I want to see kind of the meat. And kind of go down to section 2.3. I kind of feel like that should be before, like you're defining, the roles and everything else. And it just feels like it's flip-flop to me. But but then as I look at it a little bit more, maybe it's okay. You put the summary up front and then all the meat's behind it. That was just, again, this is a little bit of, I don't want to say stream of consciousness, right? But I didn't read the whole document and then go back and add comments. I'm adding comments as I'm going through the document. So
sure, that's fair. And after looking at the whole document, you kind of see how it's in some ways it's a summary where, and I think from a usability standpoint, if you're just flipping to something to make a reference, like I was flipping to look at the vested rights determination, right? So instead of having to go find deeper into Article 2 to look that up, I just went right here to the page 3.
And it is nice that it's
recommendation at a public hearing, and then decision at city council.
Right. And it's nice that it's linked in the document, right? You can just click on the section and it'll take you right there. I like that. So, I mean, that was just my, kind of my thought, and that would also kind of cover whatever the comment is about section 2.3, comment 32, right? I'm fine with it. It is, particularly after reading it, but that was kind of how I looked at it kind of going in.
Because
I look at it completely. I like that executive summary in something that sort of lets me know, do I need to go any further? I mean, or do I have to read through all that detail to determine, well, I really didn't need half of this. I just needed.
And I get it, Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm fine leaving it the way it is.
Good thing to think about. I mean, we tried to be in our staff review, we reorganized a lot of things based on, yeah, that kind of internal logic, because right now our code doesn't have much of one. Everything's just
Sure.
like
Sure.
salad of everything everywhere. So we want to have there to be a good logic about
Right.
what comes first, what comes next. So I appreciate the thinking along that line.
But see, I thought it should have read, the table should have read the other way, meaning city council should have been at the right side, and then, because to me, they're the final. To me, it was just a little confusing reading the table, starting with city council. To me, they should have been to the right. And it should have been, I don't know. Because to me, most of the time, it looks like planning and zoning and then city council are going to be your finals versus starting with your finals. Does that make sense?
Yes. What do other people, I see that. What does everyone else think?
Yeah, that didn't hit me as an issue. That wasn't an issue for me. I understand what you're saying, Kathleen.
I sort of viewed it that, most of what this applies to is around city council. So it's sort of closer. I mean, I'm looking at it as a reader, that it's closer to, the review procedure.
See, I agree with Kathleen. I think if you have it reverse, it almost reads like chronological, so it's like a flow chart of what happens in the annexation process or what happens in zoning
Right.
map. And
But I can go either way. It's not something that either way it's.
I guess thank you, Jamie, but I guess part of my thought process is you don't start with city council with all your projects for the most part, correct?
Correct. You don't.
And the way this is set up with it being city council's your first column, it like is implying that, even though they're usually your decision. But I guess why usually your decision would be at the end versus the front.
So a thing to think about. So as you get a little further, I think you saw this like one time on page 35. For each application specific review procedures, you do get like the flow chart, which goes, step 1 through 8, and which ones hit for each one. But I think it might make sense to reorganize the table so that it kind of matches that from a seat.
I was just going to say that, because I just looked at it and you're absolutely right. I can see how that line, the blocks with the lines, I mean.
It does make a certain amount of sense, definitely, to have that be consistent. Okay. Any other thoughts on the table? Let's see. I guess I could look at my comment list. Keith, you had a comment number 30. Where is it noted that it is the responsibility of the P&Z chairman to sign plat or lot changes?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I do. I was looking through, as I was going through this, I thought it was interesting. It really helped define what we do. And that was one of those things that I do. I didn't see how that was addressed. There wasn't detail.
That's, I think, let's check, and I don't remember, let's check when we get to the final subdivision plat. That's where, or minor subdivision, that's where that process would take place. And let's make sure that there's note of that.
Yeah, I didn't remember seeing that address, because I think I came back here to put this note. But yeah, we can look at that. But anyway, the question was, is that the intent of this is to spell out the details of responsibilities?
No, I mean, yes and no. Section 2.5, which we haven't got to yet, that's gonna be next time, or we just barely started it on page 34, is the application-specific review procedures and decision standards. That's where I think that level of detail is gonna be. This is just a summary table.
Okay,
So
so you think it's good.
I want to double check, and I haven't yet, I apologize. I would like to check in that site development and plating when we cover subdivisions, preliminaries, or would be preliminaries, finals, and minor subdivisions, if that's mentioned.
Okay, all right.
Section 2.4, note 5. I am on comment 31, and this is also yours, Keith. Following approval by DRC are placed on the consent agenda of the city council or final approval and approved signature of the mayor. Your question was,
Yeah, I was just curious if you could describe the consent agenda a little bit and what, is that by the fact, is the city council okays that consent agenda, is that them technically approving those items? What's sort of explain sort of how what that means?
sure, that's you. I think you got it right. It's placed on the consent agenda, and those are typically all approved as one group. They're typically made of formal, like formalities. The city council needs to formally do something, but there's not anticipated there's going to be any discussion or analysis on it. And they're placed on that consent agenda procedurally, and they'll vote to approve. They'll read everything on the consent agenda and then have one vote to approve all of those items. Also, any city council member has the right to remove something from the consent agenda and place it on the official agenda. So this doesn't say that they don't have that right. It just says that typically a minor subdivision isn't going to be discussed by city council because it either meets those criteria, the standards, or it doesn't. There's nothing really subjective to it. So they do have to approve it, probably by state law, and formally approve it, but it's not something that they're gonna all discuss and debate and have a formal presentation on, if that makes
But
sense.
could they say, I don't agree to have this on the consent agenda? I don't agree with this. So then technically what happens then?
Then it goes on the regular agenda, and then Dan or the city staff would come up and explain it, right? And
Yeah, they
have the right to discuss it, absolutely.
They can pull it off the consent agenda and put it on their regular discussion. But as Barrett was saying, that if it meets the statutory requirements and the code requirements, there's really not a whole lot to discuss, because if they override what's meeting code, then they're opening themselves up to a challenge from the applicant saying, wait, I met everything in your code. How can you deny it?
Well, and I guess what I'm reacting to, and I don't, it based like minor subdivision, we put the decision on DRC.
Mhm.
So if DRC approves something, maybe it wasn't per code. I mean, I don't know if they can say, well, this still meets the intent. And then it comes in front of Senate Council on the consent agenda, and they say, well, I don't agree to this item. What does it go back to a different cycle?
No, just deny it. I mean, I think they could it has to be finally approved by city council. So procedurally, they could not approve it. But I think for a minor subdivision, as long if it has access to the public right of way, minimum lot width, minimum lot size, connections to water, sewer, check. It's like a checklist, we're not. I don't know if I have to think about it, if there was any scenario under which DRC could approve a minor subdivision that didn't meet code.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that was almost like a veto thing, that you're saying that these different groups in here, they have the decision on it, but all those decisions have to go on a consent agenda. So technically, city council still has to put a stamp of approval on it.
That's right. they do put that's a good way of putting it. They're putting a stamp of approval on it, and they definitely have the right to not do that. But what they don't want to do is set up an expectation that staff is going to come up and present this 3-lot subdivision with, you know, and have the applicant come up and explain why they're doing it. Because it's technically, they kind of have a right. I guess it's not really a right, but it's a thing where it's not a subjective really call very, very much. It's like if they meet the development standards of the zone, a minor subdivision is kind of, yeah, just like a bit of a stamp of approval.
Okay, well, anyway, I guess to my point is there's really, if everything goes on that consent agenda, then city council, they have basically had a say so in everything.
And I think, I want to say, and I could be wrong, I want to say that that's required by law. I mean, I think the city council has to, in the same way that the planning and zoning commissioner signs the plat, I think the city council has to have a ordinance approving the subdivision. And that's what this allows for, but without having to debate it.
Okay.
Unless they want to. Is there something, would you rather?
No, I just wanted some to get it clear on what the consent agenda, if it had any weight to it.
Oh, yeah, it gives it the weight of a approved ordinance, for sure.
All right.
And we'll definitely get into that. I think there's gonna be more details on that when you get further into Article 2, when you get to the application specific requirements. So if that doesn't clarify it, then we can come back and discuss it more.
Hey, Barrett, on number 6, right below where we were just talking, you've got a spelling correction there on either, on the first line. Downtown Maitland requirements is
Good catch.
Is the ether.
the ether. And then I didn't know, so on the previous page, that short-term rental certificate, and I see it's just a decision by community development director. I think there should be a footnote there that should say something to the effect of that rental unit certificate should not be issued until inspection is completed and determined compliant with the code and whatever the code is that deals with that short-term rental.
Okay, are those details are typically, this is just a summary table, but do people think that they're just going to?
I think we just need to be very strong in that. I think
that is part of the process. As we get a little bit further along and we look at short-term rental, it'll say they have to go through, they have to meet criteria A through X or whatever, including an improved inspection by the fire department and or building official. And until all of that's completed, we don't issue the short-term rental certificate.
Okay, I just want to make sure it's covered because there's, again, there's legislation right now where the state's trying to take over home rule, and I just want to make sure we're covered.
Oh yeah, this is just a summary table. We, like Dan said, we go into pretty great detail about that in the
Okay.
5.5.
Okay.
Our short-term rental approval process is actually one of the more difficult ones around.
Yeah, so when you get to that section in 5.5, that's when we can really, if we need to be more specific, we can nail that down there.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we covered 32, Matt. Procedures manual. That's a great question. That's something we almost probably should have covered in that initial introduction, that summary. So one of the big recommendations from Clarion when they did analysis of our code was to take out, our current code goes into great detail the applicant has to turn in these 19 things for a site plan review, and 3 copies of this and 2 copies of that. And it's very repetitive. And if staff want to change some of these details about application requirements, they'd have to go all the way through city council to change the land development code. Some of that is going to be pulled out and put into what we call the procedures manual. Some of that granular technical detail about what is required in an application that staff needs to review these specific things. We are writing that, and we're going to have that at the same time for review at the same time that city council is going to be adopting this code. So you will see it, and that's just where some of that really boring technical detail is going to live, just because it's going to be much easier. It's still going to be an official policy document, and it's going to be standardized, but it's just not going to be in the land development code itself.
So will this be defined somewhere in this document, that what is the, procedures manual? How is it going to be handled more than just a mention?
I think it is defined somewhere, but let's double check that. I don't know offhand where that is, and it should be, or I agree. That was on page 2.6. Let me make a note.
And is that what we're formally going to call it?
Yeah. That's what we've been calling it.
Okay.
You have open to suggestions. That's just kind of
No, I just, I didn't know if that was a generic term you were using, or if I call up there and say, I want to see the procedures manual, are they going to know what I'm talking about? When I call the city.
right. Yeah, we will. Yeah, it's going to be called the procedures manual.
We'll transfer you to a few departments first, though.
Yeah.
But the procedures manual is not, it's a variety of things. It's not just the technical stuff. It's also like the landscape palette. So what level of landscaping you can choose, different varieties of plants or trees or things like that. But what it is it's really a document that, say we're at a pre-app or we're meeting with a developer, and we're telling them, here's the process you have to go through. When they're asking, well, what do I need to submit, or what's my time frame, and blah blah blah. That's the procedure manual kind of covers that. As Barrett was saying, you need this many sets of this, you need this study, you need that. So it's just really the technical document that we hand out to developers so they know what the minimum requirement is for submittals.
Yeah, I'm good. I just want to make sure it was properly referenced and defined.
We're definitely open to a better name, though.
Does this document establish the P&Z? That's a good question.
Yeah, that was really just one.
Charter too, right? Kathleen, you're on the city charter review. Isn't it handled there as well?
Yes, and I did bring this up. We had a charter review meeting on Monday night, and I did bring this up about the, because you're absolutely correct, Matt Lamb, it's very much defined in the charter. And this portion about the ex officio representative of Orange County School Board is not in the charter. It was, if you look at the footnote about the Florida statute that actually brings this into effect. And I brought it to Sharon, and Sharon brought it to Dan, and we had a whole conversation about it. The school board, they quit doing basically putting somebody on our planning and zoning. What they do though is they submit everything to them, and there's a person that reviews all the agenda and the projects. So, because they do not physically have someone sitting there anymore.
Makes sense.
Is that fair, Dan?
No, you're exactly right. We actually had at the last P&Z where we had the apartment community meeting, there was a member of the school board staff there in attendance, and we also had him on our TRG call yesterday discussing another project. So they're very in tune. They're very aware of what's going on. Obviously, they only care about stuff that's residential that has an impact on the schools. But they decided years ago just from a staffing perspective, not to send somebody to these meetings to sit there for hours and not have any vote on it.
So is that because this is in Florida statute, is it still appropriate to leave this language in here?
I think we need to leave it in there. It definitely does not belong in the charter, but it's there. I think to have it in there because the school board may at some time decide we're going to go ahead and staff them again. We're going to go ahead and do that.
And because they have the right to do so under Florida law, we should probably, but this says shall.
Correct.
Is there
Yeah, I was gonna say, is shall the right term?
an additional member shall be a non-voting? So is there really a, well, okay.
But it's really up to the school board whether they decide to appoint somebody. We can't force them to appoint somebody. We say that we give them the right to do that. And if they choose not to, then, or if there's another means of getting the information that they want. But if the concern is the language that it sounds more like we're forcing them to put someone on there, then yeah, maybe we soften that language.
Yeah, I think you need to basically say what you just said, that it's their option.
An additional member may be appointed as a representative of the Orange County School Board, and they shall be if appointed, they shall be a non-voting ex officio member.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. At least it's clear, right?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like we're violating our
Right.
statute. Great,
Did we jump over 35 or did?
probably.
Yeah, we did.
Can I ask a question about that? The school board. So a representative from the school board or from OCPS?
It's OCPS. It's a staff, like usually a planner, a
Actual
staff planner
staff
that they
planner.
assign. Right.
Okay. The school board part makes it sound like it could be an actual like elected
Good point.
board member.
They would have the right to do that, I guess, maybe. Even though they probably don't want to.
Yeah, we may want to just revise, look at that statute again to see if the statute says school board member or school staff or whatever the exact language is.
Okay, excellent. So the comment 35 is on 2.3.3B3.
Yeah, this one had to do with P&Z hearing and deciding appeals for the following, and it's sign permits and residential tree removal permits. Is this something new we've added, or is this been a part?
I think it's formalized. Harris is our expert on sign permits. I don't know. Do you know if that's an appeal process is formalized in the sign permits, Harris, if you're still with us?
Yeah. Which portion of it are we discussing right now?
Right now, and I don't know, when we get into this is just a factual reflection of the new code. I can check a footnote. I bet that's footnoted for sign permits. I think we do.
Yeah, sign permits have how they're processed, articulated in section 5 of the code currently.
So my
I don't remember how it's placed in this document, to be quite honest.
Well, so my question is that in this document, it's basically saying P&Z is the one that hears and decides appeals for sign permits and residential tree removals. So I'm just asking the question.
Okay, got it.
Is this new? I haven't seen this since I've been on.
Give me a second. I'll look up.
Yeah. I'm looking
I
at-
think if I remember correctly, I think that is new. I think sign permits get currently appealed to council. And I don't remember if tree removal permits get appealed to them or not. Residential tree permits, we've been preempted from a lot of that anyway at this point.
Yeah, we,
Yeah, this
we
is-
haven't had a sign permit appealed since I've been here.
So how does this, I mean, so how does this path its way to P and Z?
There's an appeal, there's now a process for that. It's, if you look at appeal to Planning and Zoning Commission is in 254E. So 254.
Okay, what, we can look when we get there.
Yeah, it's laid out later in the document. There's an application specific procedure for that.
All right.
It feels like that's like my stock answer for everything, but I don't mean it to be, but it's kind of true for right now.
Quit reading ahead.
Okay. All right. Reappointment handled solely at the city council level. Yeah, isn't reappointment of P and Z done at city council?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's unchanged from how it is now.
So does that, I mean, maybe it happened and I don't remember it. Is that just something that the timetable comes up and city council looks at it and says yay or nay, but it's not really
I think the city clerk's office tracks all the membership of the advisory boards, and when your term's up, I think they would notify you. Do you think, is the question,
Yeah, so
been reappointed but nobody told you? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember. It may have happened.
it did. You got an email that said, congratulations, you were reappointed. Anytime there is a new position, the council has to, by 3 votes, put someone on a commission. If you're serving a term and your term's up and you still have another term eligible, then you are assumed still want to be on it unless you tell the clerk otherwise. So your name gets in there, and 9 times out of 10, or probably 99 times out of 100, if that person wants to be reappointed, they're reappointed.
Okay. It's probably on that email account. I can't get access to it.
Just call the city tomorrow.
Membership is like kind of one of those subscription services, and unless you opt out, they're gonna hit you up for another 3-year subscription when it's up.
There you go.
I have an answer about the sign permit appeal. Currently, it's with BZA. So if a sign permit was denied, it would go to BZA. BZA is being blended with P&Z, so that's why it's going to P&Z now.
Okay.
Although we haven't had to do that, so.
Thanks, Harris. No, that's helpful.
That's because you're a great sign person, Harris.
Yeah, nobody's disagreed with any of your permit decisions. How about that?
Is that a good sign?
It's too lenient.
So and that also brings up a bigger thing, that the code proposes to eliminate the Board of Zoning adjustment and put all of those decisions to P&Z.
How often do they deal with anything?
Well, right now they deal primarily with variances. Probably 95 or 100% of their stuff are variances, and variances are often really a zoning issue. So they're really more of a zoning decision, and so that's why we're getting rid of BZA and just putting it all back to P&Z. So if this new code gets adopted as proposed, and there's some staff 15% administrative modification to those, like setbacks and things like that, the variances should cut down quite a bit, because variances are very, very difficult to get, and the applicants are starting to get the word now that it's really hard to get one approved. So they're not going to apply and waste the $300 in the 3 months unless they really think it's going to get approved. And most of them don't.
It's much more typical. At other places I've worked, that variances are decided at the planning commission level. Exactly the reasons Dan said, it's a planning and zoning issue.
Variances are a little bit different from your typical rezoning. They have to meet 8 criteria. If they do not meet all criteria, then staff denies it, and P&Z will have to deny it unless they can provide competent substantial evidence of why they meet all 8 criteria. And that's why variances are almost impossible to get now.
Right. So the next comment was 38 was why is floodplain administrator omitted from this section? It's because the process for getting floodplain development permits are all in Article 5. And we kept that separate because that's floodplain development is something like we talked about in Article 5, where it's really closely regulated by FEMA and controlled at the federal level by how those floodplain development permits have to work as part of our accreditation for flood insurance. So we have decided to keep that all together so that we don't accidentally change things that are going to affect our floodplain accreditation.
Does, would that apply to any of these others that they should, if you're going with that logic, should you move some of these others into section, or are they all applied in this section?
No, they all apply in this section, and the only reason we put that Bay of reference to there is just in case somebody was looking for it here.
Okay, all right.
Then we'd say, all right, now actually go look over here, because
Okay.
we don't want to pull it out. No, that was a very conscious decision. Uh, 213, the graphic or flow chart. And this might be something that when you got to 2.5, we actually do use a graphic.
Yeah, I saw that, and then I kind of went beyond page 237, and it looks like perhaps that's, I don't know. I'll hold my comments to the next period, I guess. But it looks like there's a graphic. I don't know if flow chart is really there, but I did see that at the end. So maybe that does cover it. This is basically just defining each of these pieces parts, right? And then
Yes,
2.5 kind of puts together the process for each of the various application procedures.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. Yeah, we can pass this now.
Okay. So next one is on comment 40 on 214. Yeah, I think you're right. I think we did change it and it didn't change the title. You're right. It's kind of nonsensical.
Yeah, if we're going to delete it, we just need to delete it, right?
Well, it does talk about what happens, what the community development director does do. So I think we just need to change this.
Oh, that's it. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the next or one of the following ones, right?
Yeah, we need to change the subhead. To, I don't know, to something more accurate. Two 15, 2 is encouraged the correct word. Ah. Good question. So it's here's required, except provided shall be held each of the following applications. So map amendments, plan developments, conditional use, site plan, and subdivisions. And here we're just basically saying they can do it. And in fact, we encourage them to do it for anything that requires a public hearing. Was your comment, you don't think you don't think encourage is kind of meaningless?
Yeah.
I don't disagree.
And again, I don't know, I really didn't think through what the scenario or the situation would be where we have any other application that would require a public hearing. But I don't know. I kind of think we either say it's required or not required.
Well,
I don't know.
there are a lot of public hearings required, and I think we can say they're optional. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, because then up at top, we say, except as provided in subsection 3, a neighborhood meeting shall be held before any of the following applications are submitted.
And here we say that the community development director can waive it if it will not have a significant impact on surrounding land uses or public facilities. And then we're like, it's optional before the submission of any other application, but encouraged for any application to private public hearing. I tend to agree with you. I don't know how to operationalize that or implement that. I mean, does that mean the staff has to literally encourage them, or does it just mean that we're, as a city in code, saying that we think it's a good idea?
Please conduct a neighborhood meeting, please.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah. I'm not saying that. I don't know. It just seems like if we're going to make this clearer, I just think that kind of, it seems to muddy the water. And again, this is one of those things where, kind of going back to my first comment, and that's why I said, let me hold off until I review section 2.5. But, I said a graphic or a flow chart. I don't really feel like those things in 2.5 are kind of a flow chart, right? Because there's so many different kind of scenarios that apply, and maybe that's too cumbersome. Maybe that's impossible to cover that. But I don't know. It just, this one here just seems like it's a little too soft of a word, and I don't know what anybody else thinks, or if I'm just overanalyzing it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is if you had specific reasons, there's places you wouldn't think it appropriate. But yeah, you might as well not have encouraged on there. I mean, why would somebody want to go the extra trouble if they don't have to?
Right. And again, like I said, I didn't lay out and kind of try to figure out what would the scenario be where have any other application that requires a public hearing. That's the situation that we'd have to, so I don't know if Barrett, you or Dan or the consultant had looked at that or could provide some guidance on that. And if what that is it really, if we think it's necessary, whatever, then I would say we should require it.
Well, here's one. I have an example. There was an agreement for the Maitland Fitness project that's at Uptown Maitland Lot 2, and that was an agreement that went to City Council to be revised. It was a public hearing. This would encourage them to have a public meeting with the surrounding property owners to discuss their plans. They're not required to, but this. I don't think removing encouraged changes anything. It's optional. We're not requiring them to do it. And I think it's optional, they can have it. We're telling them they can have it and follow this procedure. But I don't know what encouraged means. I don't know whether that means that if they don't do it, we're kind of gonna deduct some points from them, or I don't know. From a staff perspective, I kind of agree. I don't know how to operationalize that.
Right.
What's the request that would trigger you to say go have a neighborhood meeting versus in your example, like what are they asking for that would require neighborhood input?
They were asking, in this case, they were asking to change the negotiated agreement that was part of a development agreement that was then transferred into this agreement. So it involved building height, uses, adding uses, that kind of thing. So, I think that was just a response to an example of something that required a public hearing that wasn't one of the above items. But I still don't, I tend to agree that I don't think where maybe a neighborhood meeting may or may not be appropriate, but again, encourage doesn't really tell us which it is.
So is the intent with this that we're just saying, hey, we're just letting you know that it's a good idea to do this. You know, it's sort of a helpful way to make sure the neighborhood community sort of buys into this. Is that what we're trying to?
I think that's probably right. I think that's probably the idea, is saying that if you can communicate with the neighbors, with the surrounding property owners, and get buy-in or change, or because if you get into when we start talking about the community meetings, the purpose of it is for the applicant to get that input and to maybe make adjustments to his application to account for neighborhood concerns. And we're saying they're encouraging them to do that because it's more likely that they'll be successful at planning and zoning or city council or wherever they're having their public hearing. I think that is the intent. I just don't know.
Well, if you leave the word encourage, I would just
the
define why. Why are you encouraging it?
I think you hit it because we think that they're useful in some cases.
Okay. So
but
you're basically just doing a service to the applicant, saying, hey, here's a helpful hint.
What I think I have a suggestion. Can we just move that to the procedures manual and say here, I think here it's appropriate to say that it's optional. And then in the procedures manual, we can say, hey, dear applicant, this is why it might be a good idea to have a community meeting.
Okay. Works for me.
But I mean, I guess it works for me too, right? But I still think if we're going to do that, I think there needs to be some kind of defensible qualitative component of what would be required, other than to say, well, we like one here. You know, I don't, that doesn't really, I don't think that, I mean, we define so many different things, and here we're gonna, I don't know. And maybe it's too difficult, right? Then.
Well, is it maybe not self-evident what the purpose is? Like above, we talk about the purpose. And are we saying applicants, you know,
I guess just in general, right? And there's some other things down here, like at this point in time, why we're not supporting public meeting, neighborhood meeting, I'm a little bit surprised by.
But they're all public meetings, planning and zoning's a public meeting, you know, I think it's just to build some support should the applicant need it, because all of our meetings are designed for them to come in and weigh in.
So this is a new provision, and this was designed to take the place of that first P&Z meeting where you guys haven't got any information about the project and the neighborhood. Because think about the plan development modification for Maitland West that came to P&Z, where essentially it was a lot of the neighbors came out and were talking about it. They're like, this is the first we've heard of it. We're really concerned. We're really nervous about the impacts on our roads, et cetera, runoff, stormwater. And the applicants kind of spoke to them and tried to reassure them that they were going to work with Orange County and talk to them. And this is designed to really take the place of that, to have a venue, an opportunity for the applicant and those property owners to exchange ideas before, and just have a meeting just for that, you know, and so that before they even apply, they can modify their proposal to account for those community concerns. That way it's not mixing up kind of the purpose of like your recommendation here, your recommendation meeting with this neighborhood meeting. We're trying to separate that out. Because it's right now they're trying to do both at the same time and probably not doing a great job of either one. So that's the intent. The intent is for this to take that place of that initial, what we call bloodletting, where it's just the applicant gets beat up by the neighbors because this is the first they're hearing about it, and it's happening at P&Z.
Right.
The other thing I would add to that is it also takes it out of the public hearing format where we have these kind of parliamentary procedures and a limited 3 minutes at the mic, and it kind of creates yeah, I think in a lot of cases, if you were to ask the public, it leaves them with the feeling that they're not being heard, as if they're forced to speak to, the Planning and Zoning Commission. They're not allowed to adjust the applicant. They're not really able to adjust staff, and that kind of eliminates, that kind of restricted dialogue for the neighborhood meeting as well. Just want to kind of add that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Harris, I think. And furthermore, I think it's also important to note that the public is also allowed to come to the public hearing, right? This isn't taking them out of the public hearing process. This is just instituting a developer community meeting before the public hearing.
Right.
So that they can have a more open exchange of ideas and information before they're up there on YouTube at a microphone.
And that's always been a complaint of developers coming into that P&Z meeting that is really just a public meeting that goes back to DRC.
Matt, you're on mute, I think, or I see Matt talking and we're not hearing him.
Sorry, my internet is messed up today for some reason. What I said, what I don't know what y'all heard or what you didn't hear, but all the things you all just mentioned as favorable for the neighborhood meeting, I agree with, and that's fantastic. And so maybe my statement earlier about taking them out of the public meeting process, maybe that was misstated, right? But all of those things that are positive about the neighborhood meeting, but then we stay here for these, it's optional and encouraged. So are we kind of conflicting ourselves here, right? Why don't we just say that it's required?
I don't think it's required for any zoning change. It's required for any plan development, any conditional use, any site plan, and a subdivision. I'd say that's a pretty big chunk of our applications that affect the public, and they're required.
Okay. All right.
Glenn, what was your point? I didn't mean to disregard what you were saying. It was just you're both talking at the same time.
I'm sorry.
It wouldn't be the first, but no, I think I was just saying that one of the ongoing complaints about that first P&Z meeting was it was really just a neighborhood meeting because P&Z wasn't being asked to do anything. And then it went back to DRC. So it probably is what you're saying, taking those things into account, which are right.
Okay.
And so whether it's encouraged, I still think it's going back to the initial comment. I think it is tough because I don't know how, if I'm reading that, I don't know what that means. So I'm comfortable with, that's why I'm comfortable with removing that and saying it's optional. And there's a lot more discussion about the nuts and bolts of these community meetings in the procedures manual. So I think it's covered there. I think we talk about what the intent and purpose is. Granted, we talk about the intent and the purpose here, but it's elaborated on more in the procedures manual.
Okay.
Okay.
Can we talk about footnote 39?
Yeah, is that next?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's all the community. We're still a neighborhood meeting procedure. Posted notice.
That's the footnote.
Okay. As you go further on for other things like the conditional use, we talked a lot about this at staff to whether or not to require physical posted notice at a site as opposed to doing it just virtually and in the newspaper. And so we were wondering whether we should physically post the neighborhood meetings. What are your opinions on that? Is that you guys know what I'm talking about when I say post it? It's like the little cardboard sign physically stuck in front of a building. Just in the fact that the website now has ways for people to be notified, to sign up, to be notified of land development applications in their neighborhood. We're just kind of wondering if it's a big logistical hassle for us to go and post these signs and take them up and put them back, and requiring the applicant to do it or us to do it, and go collect them, and it gets trashy. It becomes litter. Is this still in the 2021? Is it important for us to have these cardboard signs in front of properties that are the subject of community meetings?
So let me ask a question. So what is your goal to make sure that you communicate with everybody that would have some connection or opinion about this site and what's going to happen to it? Is that your goal?
Yes, because the neighbors get a mailed notice if you're within a certain radius of the property. But then there's the posted notice. It would be, to try to capture everybody else who might not get their mail or goes there because they work next to it and they don't live next to it, but still interact with that space. It's very important to them. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example for me. I mean, when I walk the neighborhood, I see those signs, and even for me trying to be aware of what's going on, sometimes those signs are my first notice that there's an issue with that, that site, or there's something going on there. So I think they, in those instances, they have a relevance for those people, like you said, that they might work next door, or that might be on their path to somewhere.
Well, and I agree with Keith that that a lot of times you see the notice before you get the mail, number one. And number two, one of the things that I'll be bringing up later into that mailed notice requirement on 2-25 is, and we've had a lot of conversation about this, is like the mailing it to just the 500 feet around the property. And as you saw with the Bellows project, nobody on the other side of the lake got that notification because it's more than 500 feet, but it directly affects that lakefront portion. And I think that's I think there's an exception. That's more of an exception than the rule. But I think that's a very important point, is keeping those signs, because then people start to talk about it. And especially with, it was talking about the, and again, I may be jumping ahead, like Matt Lamb, the, newspaper, printing that stuff in the newspaper. Well, we don't have any provisions to say, should it be on Facebook and prominently put on the city's website. So I think there's just a couple tweaks on that, but I think I think those signs are still important.
That's what I'm hearing. I kind of think so too. I think especially for the community meetings, that's when they're most appropriate, because that's earliest on in the process, and that's when they're going to have that opportunity to give that initial input, right? Rather than finding out about it at city councils, and the pieces are all more in place. So,
and isn't it more effective earlier in the process rather than getting to city council and then city council gets chewed out?
I think so. I agree. I think I very much think so. Oh, where am I? Sorry. Keep these.
Yeah, and I think we are such an information age that you get deluged with emails. You're trying to, all this electronic stuff to read, and it just gets lost in the noise.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. So next is comment 43. We asked the applicant to describe the application review process. That's a fair point, a fair question, Matt. Like because staff is going to be attending these, and that might be the one role for staff. Staff is kind of intended to be like a neutral source of information, like a referee, being like, this is what the code says, this is the process. Should it be more appropriate for the staff members to explain the process? That's your comment, right?
Yeah, that was my concern. Like, again, and it may be that there are some different perspectives or varied interpretations, but I kind of feel like the staff should be able to define that and provide their interpretation. And then if there's some major issue, let it be the applicant to provide a response to that. I don't know. When I read it, it read like something wasn't right with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with clarifying that.
And then the next item was the written summary.
Mhm.
And it kind of talks a little bit about it in the next section, but it kind of feels like, or my question was, does summary get reviewed by staff prior to going into the application?
I don't think so. Just like they submit their written summary and then we can, in our staff report, make reference to it. And if we disagree, if there's something factually incorrect, if they're like, we had a committee meeting and it was unanimously agreed that this is an amazing process, and staff would say, in the staff report would note, staff present, does not agree, or staff present was applicants heard otherwise, and state how it differs for that interpretation. It's basically kind of we're trying to, in order to keep costs down and keep everything efficient, to put as much on the applicant as possible. But you're right. I think, and so that was the thought there. But if we disagree, we're certainly going to note that in the staff report.
Right. And I guess my question was to one of the points that somebody made earlier, right? It's better to have that discerned earlier in the process. And so I just didn't know if there was, and maybe it's never an issue.
So any person may submit a written response to applicant's meeting summary after being complete.
Right. But again, any person submitting it in staff, I don't know. But if that hasn't been an issue and you guys are good with that, I'm fine with that. I just didn't know. That was just my question.
That is it's a traffic report.
A traffic report?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know. I mean, it's kind of, it's along the same lines, right? It's a different interpretation. I mean, and again, if this is never, I don't want to say never, but if this is rarely an issue where, the applicant's summary of the meeting is, generally indicative and consistent with what the staff's interpretation of the review or summary of the meeting is, then I see it's fine. I just didn't know if there was anything that, kind of sets the groundwork and whatnot, keep it to the point of making it an easier process throughout the overall process was my thought. But if it's not.
Well, I don't want to say it's not an issue because this is a new process. This is not what we do right now. This is a new process.
Okay.
And to your point, I mean, now I didn't get traffic response. Now I do. It's like they can put the rose tinted explanation of how it was on there. The idea is certainly to not, what we didn't want to do is put staff in the position of being the note taker, right? And having to keep people's names, because then if we're wrong, then they can say, oh, that's not right at all.
I concur. No, I get that. I follow that 100%. And to your point, right? It may at some point it's going to have to be, if there's a difference or there's a disconnect, it's going to have to be kind of clarified and resolved at some point. But
yeah, and that's the best way we could come up with, is have them do the summary, and then us allow it to be clear that we'll announce that anybody wants to.
Right.
If you want to sign up to get that summary, you can, and then they can respond and be like, well, actually my perspective wasn't accurately captured here. We kind of want to encourage that. If they want to put a written comment in, for you guys and for staff to get it, we'd like to get that up front.
Right.
That's the intent. And then we would note, like, if it was totally way off base, what we would rather do is just note different nuances to it rather than have the responsibility of like writing it ourselves.
Right. Fair enough.
So I have a question / comment that kind of got sparked by Matt's previous question. So I went back and I looked through this again, and it doesn't actually state in here that a member of staff will be present. It states that the meeting is held at City Hall, that it's to the public. but not specifically whether a member of staff will be there. So I kind of feel like, okay, let's say it's open, you have the room, there isn't staff there, then the requirement for the applicant to explain the process makes sense because then staff isn't there. And the onus to prepare the summary also makes sense. But if there is a staff member there, I feel like it could kind of clear this up, and I don't want to put any more requirements on staff. I don't know if your intent is to be there.
No, I think that's a great comment. I didn't realize that wasn't sit. I think because I've been drafting some of the stuff in the procedures manual, and we are working on that, and we put some more about the neighborhood meeting in there.
Yeah.
I
I think-
never even thought to interpret that staff would not be there, but it is a good point that you bring up, Jamie. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we should. I think that was always the intent. So I appreciate that you're not wanting to put more on staff, but I think we do need to clarify that staff will be present and briefly outline their role. So we don't want to be the presenters. We're basically kind of a neutral party to kind of be a fact checker, right? To explain the process.
That's kind of why I feel like maybe the writing the summary of the meeting, if you're required to be there, might be good for staff to do, because then it is an unbiased account of what happened. Again,
Maybe, but then the
more work.
responsibility for accuracy is daunting. It's like hard enough when it's a recorded meeting, and these aren't really recorded. Sometimes when we're doing meeting minutes, we have to go back and listen to recording like 6 times to make sure that we get the summary right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I'll have to think about that. But certainly I think your point that we need to clarify
Suggestion.
present is is important.
But then how would the applicant know who a list of meeting attendees are?
Sign-in sheet.
Oh, okay.
That's how, but again, that would be up to them. And if they want to record it, I mean, it's just, again, it's trying to shift the theory here is to shift the burden from the city to have the neighborhood meeting, to have it be the applicant show. And for us not to be put in the position of like that we're selling it or promoting this development or one way or the other, but really at this stage, we're just in a listening phase. Okay, so there's nothing else on there. $45. Application submission. Glenn, this was yours. You want to talk about the deposit of fees?
And yes, and this might not be the appropriate time and place to talk about it, but that it just triggered. I know one of the fees that we have is that $5,000 fee that is not that old and has been somewhat controversial. And
yeah, no, this would be the appropriate time to do it, to talk about it. Does everybody know what the pass-through fees are? It's a $5,000 deposit that city draws upon
for various things.
And it's for like any attorney's fees or surveyors or any non-city staff that we have to use as consultants to review the item. And then the balance that's not used is refunded to the applicant at the end of the application.
Hey, Glenn, I think you froze.
Yeah,
I don't know if you were sharing something.
So, I said that it may not be appropriate to talk about now. It was just when I saw that, it triggered, and maybe we could circle back around and talk about that. There's a $5,000 fee that we charge for legal fees for any applicant in the city. And we may be the only city in the entire state to do this. And it was in the spirit of that being developer friendly and open for business. And so when I saw fees in here, that's what triggered the comment. But Now is, I assume, not the right time to talk about it.
Just you mean, when you talk about it, you just mean the concept of pass-through fees in general.
Well, the $5,000 fee was implemented for attorney's fees. Maybe now you're suggesting or saying that it's different, that there are pass-through fees. Are there other pass-through fees? A majority of that, I think, is legal fees, and that was how it was adopted, was to pay the attorney.
Yeah, it's the attorney, but it's not only the attorney, it's also like the city surveyor, and things like that for a subdivision. A lot of times. you gotta get
Any
rid of
project.
Pardon?
That $5,000 fee is for any project, not just subdivision.
Correct, but it's like, all I'm saying is that it's not only attorneys, but it's any outside consultants that beyond city staff that we need to utilize in the review of the application. That's what it's eligible for, I guess.
Does everyone know what the fee I'm referring to? And again, the comment of fees must be paid for, I'm sure belongs here. It just triggered the rest of, again, me suggesting that we revisit this as a group, because it's always been a very controversial fee that we adopted. Maybe it was like 2007.
I mean, from a financial impact perspective, right, the alternative would be that we would be paying out of the city budget, these consultant fees, right? Either it's our legal consultants or our surveyor, everything like that. And it would be, we would probably have to raise our fees overall, like across the board, to account for that. So I'm wondering if maybe this isn't a little bit more fair, in that if we don't use the fees, if this application doesn't require extensive legal review or extensive review by specialist, outside specialists, then they get that $5,000 back. Whereas they use more than $5,000, then they have to pay more. So I think there's an equity aspect to it. That's if we're talking about just the concept of pass-through fees.
Mm-hmm. We have a $5,000 application fee, and we're the only city in the entire state that does this. And sometimes there's an argument that the city has skin in the game, and they're a stake in this, and they have a cost of doing business to bring in development of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
Now may not be the time for you and I to debate this, but maybe it is something we can revisit as a group, because it has worked against us, and the intent for it to cover some expenses of the city, it has worked against us. We have projects that won't even explore things with us because we make them pay a $5,000 deposit. And then they have no control about how the city spends the money. So I'm sort of appealing to the group to say, it's outside of this document, but that's where my comment came from.
Well, where are the fees established? I mean, is it outside this document? Or is it just at another point in the document that we haven't seen yet? I don't know.
The footnote says that it should be the system of pass-through fees. Right now, it's in the code, which I could pull up. I mean, section 7.5.141. They're recommending put that in the procedures manual, because it is kind of that technical, like all fees, right? Like most application fees are discussed, they're established by resolution, not in the land development code, right? So all of our fees, like what we're charged an application fee for a plan development, what our pass-through fees are.
So we get to review the procedures manual?
Yeah.
Okay.
This just says that they are going to. That's kind of where we get into the details of it. But right now, if
But
anybody
it
wants,
sounds like, Glenn, that's where we need to review that stuff, is when we get that procedures manual.
Yep. And that was my question. Is there an opportunity to talk about that someplace in here besides now, which I didn't really believe this was the paragraph for it, but it made me want to address it.
And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there is a better place or time.
Well,
It's kind of a bigger, in some ways, it's a bigger question than the land development code, because it's kind of like, it involves budgetary analysis and financial analysis about like city budgets, right? So it's not just really a planning and zoning issue, if that makes sense.
yep. And so what happens then, if we're talking about it a little, if you're an applicant, you pay this $5,000 fee and they call Cliff, city attorney, or Drew, it's a blank check for the city to go use and have all their fees covered, whether they're against the project, for the project. And that apartment complex that came in recently in Jim Lake paid a $5,000 fee, but the project on Horatio paid a $5,000 fee.
It's a deposit. I mean, it's a fee, but if it's not used, they get back.
You don't know how it is used. We have no control how that person has no control how it's used. You could call Cliff 10 times, he bills you, and you just go, we talked about your project 10 times.
True.
Well, yeah,
So I guess
but
to answer your question, I mean, it is, the application pass-through fees are established by city council. So they're in the code now from city council. So, I mean,
Yep.
that is something, that might be something that is probably best brought up maybe outside the context of LDC, but your point's well taken. That's what you're suggesting. So I don't, that might be something we could look for it, put a place on the agenda at a future meeting.
That's my point, because this was adopted in 2007. I think it was 2007, when there was a lot of development going on. And so we did it, but it was very controversial at the time because it was saying it's going to discourage people. And we don't want to discourage people from bringing us new ideas or redevelopment opportunities in the city. So maybe we can put it down for a future agenda item.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be duly noted, and I think that's something that you as a planning and zoning commissioner can ask the chairman to place on a future agenda.
Well, I'm confused. I thought we were saying that the procedures manual is where this information is defined and we would be able to review the procedures manual at some point.
We are, but the idea of pass-through fees is established by city council. I mean, that's in the current land development code. So if we were to, I don't think we could just unilaterally decide to abolish them, if you will, without consulting, without part of a larger process, right? You could recommend it, I guess, as a planning and zoning commission. But if the idea is just to have a larger discussion about it, I tend to agree with Glenn that it's probably a bigger issue than just the land development code or the procedures manual for that matter.
Hey,
Yeah, I guess I'm just not understanding. You're saying it's in part of the existing land development code. Is it not coming over?
Correct. Per the footnote. This would probably make more sense if you kind of read what's here. I mean, they make a reference to it, and I guess I could look it up. I don't want to belabor this point, but maybe to read what's in the current LDC is what Glenn describes. It's a basis and justification for collecting a deposit for review of their application. And it also in the current LDC, it outlines it's a $300 fee for this, a $500 fee for this. All the different planning applications have their fees outlined in the land development code. And in this restructuring of land development code, the consultant's recommendation, and staff agrees, is to not that we can unilaterally as staff change fees or pass-through fees, but that they're no longer housed in the land development code, but they're housed in this procedures manual. So
So let me ask the question one more time and then I'll quit asking it. So you just said that it's going to be in the procedures manual and we're going to get a chance to review that procedures manual, right? Or is that not something we get to review and make recommendations on?
I don't think that we've completely, I would assume so. I don't want to answer that out of hand, but that was my understanding.
Could we get clarification on that? Because if that's the case, then we'll see these fees in the procedure manual. And if we are not, then we bring this back up for discussion.
I understand. Oh, so we'll talk about it at that time. Okay. All right. Anything else here? 17. Next one is on 18. That is withdrawal of application.
We missed 46.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess we'll cover it in the procedures manual.
No, what, hang on, sorry. Guidelines or maximum time was established. That, yeah,
I get it. I don't know that I really followed that procedures manual definition as well. So I get it now.
H2. Yeah, the question is, has a situation occurred with any applications? And if you mean whether just resubmittals or applications just kind of lay dormant without people withdrawing the applications, that does happen quite often.
Okay.
And it's kind of a big problem. We have some applications hanging around from 2018, 2019, where they might pass P&Z and then they just kind of go away, right? They don't ever withdraw their application, and we don't have anything established where it's really cut and dry when application is considered null and void.
Okay. So we feel that 6 months is an appropriate time frame?
Yeah, because we allow them to
amend it and extend it or whatever.
Yeah, they can extend it indefinitely, but as long as they're staying in contact with us.
Right. Okay.
So simultaneous processing of when this happens, sometimes they might do a conditional use. Well, right now, let me think of a good example. They might want to amend the comprehensive development plan and submit a PD application, right? Or a comp plan and a rezoning, or and this basically just says that they can submit those both at the same time. They don't have to wait till the first one's over to start the second one. But just saying that if changes result in one before the other one. An example, or here's a better.
Oh, but I guess my question to that kind of also then is that obviously they can submit them, right? But then it says at the discretion of the community development director may be processed simultaneously. So is there any reason why the development director wouldn't process them simultaneously, or is there any risks of him or her not processing them simultaneously?
Yeah, it can be problematic because here's an example. Let's say somebody's applying, the property owner is applying for a plan development where they're proposing really outlandish conditions on their plan development, real outrageous uses and development standards. And they're also submitting a site plan review to develop the buildings that are reliant on that plan development. Well, then staff has now, the clock is running in that 6-month time period where we have to review both proposals. And it's really difficult to review the site plan proposal if the rules by which that site plan proposal is going to be evaluated are changing over here based on the plan development proposal. So in that case, a director might say, you know what, we're not going to review this site plan review until we reviewed the plan development, because we don't think this is going forward in this present state of time or this present shape. However, if it was one that looked like a more formality, like they were very similar in nature, we might want to allow the simultaneous process applications. Did that make any sense, or am I?
Yeah, and I get the states in there, so as long as all applicable and state local requirements are satisfied, I mean, that gives me a comfort level. I just, it seems like we're going to great lengths to kind of define a process, and then at various pieces and parts, we just leave it up to an individual's discretion. It seems like we would want to have it a little bit better defined around that for everybody's benefit. But maybe it's too hard to discern every possible scenario that would come up. I'm just trying to kind of think through it, and seems like we would want some other kind of component or aspect, or
The decision-making criteria.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be, I agree, that would probably be,
And I don't know what that is. So I can't offer up any recommendations. So I know that sounds pretty lame, but that's just,
No, I agree with the sentiment, and it's because it doesn't really provide much guidance. It's just hard to account for without coming up with really complicated, maybe perhaps even convoluted set of criteria.
Yeah,
that anticipates any possible scenario that might come up, rather than just like letting some person decide in their professional opinion about whether the staff can do it or not.
well, and to be honest with you, I mean, it works both ways, right? It's just like my comment earlier about not putting it up to the public works director to determine when guardrails should be present. I mean, it puts a lot of responsibility on the public works director that the public works director really doesn't want. So I mean, is this putting an undue burden or responsibility on the development director, when if we could have laid it out, it made it clear so everybody understands the process?
Well, maybe it's helpful to think of it this way. I think the default is that they don't allow simultaneous processing applications, right? You're the applicant, you're the property owner, go get your comprehensive plan amendment finished before we will process your zoning amendment that's based on that comprehensive plan amendment, right?
So then
in reality though, that was add almost 5 months to the process, and we can say,
Right.
let's do that simultaneously, knowing that your zoning amendment is completely dependent upon the comp plan amendment.
So then why don't we then reword this section to say, it is the intent not to do that, but if the applicant working with the community development director can determine that it's, in the best, whatever, I don't know the language, right? That kind of put it on working that out, then simultaneous processing of applications would be conducted. Because what you just shared there, I don't really read that in this thing. It kind of just says may. But I think if you started off with saying it is the intent to generally not do that, but if the applicant can, in negotiations or coordination, come up with an appropriate kind of plan or strategy to make that work, then it would be done. Is my internet going down again?
No, I hear you.
Okay.
I'm wondering if, Barrett, are you there? Barrett appears to be frozen.
Uh-oh. The city shut down at 8:30.
I guess that means the party's over, huh?
Well, you're the chairman.
Yeah, we were running up against 8:30 anyway.
We were. I thought we could get done, but I apologize. I had too many comments.
I guess give
We'll
Barry.
never get back in.
He's gonna come back on. If not,
Until he gets back in. I thought he's the one that let me in.
Yeah, we may all be stuck here.
we may need somebody to
You all
let us
might
out.
be.
Yeah, even Harris dropped off, which is kind of weird. Because he was remote.
It says we're still live on YouTube.
It does say that. You're right. But it only shows 5 participants. It only shows us 5.
What kind of special button do you now have, Keith?
Nothing. I think, I'm concerned we need to get off here because I think we're supposed to be chaperoned.
Oh, you're right, Keith.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
We're close on the hour, so I think we probably should sign off,
Okay.
just given the nature of our.
Yep.
All right. Well,
All right.
thanks, everybody.